How to generate, articulate, and validate a great insight will begin shortly.
Becky, shall I kick off? I think it's time. Hi, it's John Kieran here, Chief Juicer, Brain Juicer. Well, I'm armed with a cup of tea and a biscuit, which is the only proper British thing to be doing at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But look, welcome to everyone, on the same European time zone. I hope you've got coffee rather than tea, as is right and proper. And anyone joining us from the US, morning. And if anyone's joining us from Australia, well, frankly, it's just far too late. I think that's too keen of you, but I'll try and make it worth your while. So we're going to talk about insights. I mean, the most used word in market research, and maybe we all feel to some degree the most abused word. But I think let's not get hung up about that. I think what I want to do is to share with you 6 years of experience with trying to quantitatively validate insights, which is a hell of a challenge, really. I mean, and it all started with Philips. Philips came to us basically with a challenge about 6 years ago, and they basically said to us, look, we are brilliant inventors. We've invented half of the electronic technology of the 20th century, but because we're such bad marketeers, we've singularly failed to kind of commercialize it, and do justice to it. And I kind of love the Dutch for that. They're very direct, and they know what they're good at, and they knew what they weren't so good at, and I think they were right. And they said, so what we want to do, we've kind of got religion. We want to put consumer insight at the heart of everything we do. Because we have to connect our, brilliant inventions with people, with our consumers. We need to learn about their lives and how this technology would fit their life so that we can communicate it and we can design the products to really kind of connect the two. And so they put out a challenge to a number of agencies to say, can you quantitatively assess insights? Because it's quite, they're an abstract thing. They're not the end product. They don't have the end benefit in them. So it is quite an interesting challenge to be able to, to do that. Anyway, we won the pitch, and what I'm going to share with you is 3,500 insights later. That's how many roughly I think we've tested, not just for Philips, for a number of other companies now. And what we've learnt about what makes a great insight, how you write a great insight, just some of the rules, the tips, the tricks, the heuristics. Heuristics always sound better than rule of thumb, doesn't it? It just makes you sound more intelligent, but it's the same stuff. So look, let's start. Why are great insights like a fridge? Because when you open them up, a light should go on. Yeah, when you hear a really good insight, there should be a bit of an aha moment. It shouldn't just be a, yeah, I know that. And this is the point when I'm doing this as a kind of a tutorial or a coaching session, I tend to ask everyone, what's your company definition of a great insight? And there's usually, every company has one, and it's usually something like a penetrating truth with commercial application. That's one of the shorter ones, and I think it's true. It's accurate enough. But what we've found is it's not very workable. When you're actually trying to work with insights, you're trying to generate them and assess whether you've got something that works. What works much better as a definition is what it should evoke in the listener. Evoke, if you like, in your target audience. And so what we've come up with is a great insight should evoke something like the following. Wow, you really understand me almost better than I understand myself. When someone says something and you kind of immediately nod, you recognize it as true, but there's something about it that kind of makes you raise an eyebrow or smile. It's kind of like, but I've never really heard it like that before. There's something fresh and original in the way that it's expressed. Possibly even slightly surprising, but absolutely true and resonant. So this is the definition we use, and we just find that it's a much better definition to work for people to work with. And putting it, if you like, into the quantitative context, what we're actually measuring, here are the two axes, is resonance, wow, you really understand me, and edge, almost better than I understand myself. And so to give an example of, a great insight, let's take Dove. This was the insight behind the campaign for Real Beauty. For years and years, it's almost as if the beauty industry has set out to make women feel bad about themselves. Wouldn't it be great if there was a brand that celebrated women as they are? And there's something about that immediately resonates with women, and they're kind of going, do you know what, you're right, that's true, that is how the beauty industry has made me feel. To give you an example of one that resonates but it's got no edge, it might be something like, look, as a parent, it's important to feed my children 5 fruit and veg a day. Okay, it's true. As a parent, I recognize that, it resonates, but I know it, the kids know it, everyone knows it, so what? It doesn't suggest anything, it doesn't take you anywhere, and therefore it's not, in our opinion, a potent insight. There was a very good article, if anyone's interested, by a guy called Mark Simmons, and he wrote an article where he described spring sight, and I just think it's a nice phrase because it's exactly what we're talking about, which is a spring sight is something that takes you somewhere. It's a springboard to a great communications campaign, a springboard to better products. And that's what happens when you add edge to resonance. And you probably won't be surprised that a lot of the insights that we test, have resonance but not much edge. I think it's difficult. I mean, it's easy to give you, if you like, what we're measuring and what we're trying to get, but I think it is genuinely difficult to find edge. And I'll share some examples of insights where I think there is edge. So let's do that. A couple, some case studies, some examples, if you like. Now, we've got about 100 people listening, and my guess, when I've done this in a conference setting, my guess is that quite a few of you will own a digital photo frame. And what I normally do is I kind of ask you, how many of you own a photo frame? Now keep your hand up if you were given it, because what we've discovered through the insights process, the testing process with Philips, who invented the thing, is that it's the perfect gift. It's not all about the technology that they thought it was. So on the grid on the left there, they were talking about all the technical features and how many megabytes it can hold, none of which really resonated. But as a meaningful gift, as the perfect gift, it's about the right price, it's personal, it's something emotional. It's great. The other thing I then do is ask people to keep their hand up if they've re-gifted it, because quite a proportion, I'm afraid, never actually get unpacked. They just get re-gifted. And it's actually one of the things that we've highlighted to Philips that is a problem. I mean, they need to focus on usage of the photo frames. But anyway, that's another story, if you like. Another example, they came to us. We were working with internet phones. And on the left-hand side, if you want to scan it quickly, you can kind of see I'm a regular Skype user, but I find it annoying being unreachable when my PC is off. All of the insights were rooted in the technology, in the features and how it works. None of which, as you can see, it was terrible. It didn't resonate. It had no edge. And actually, the insight that they've used to promote what is now, I think, the brand leading internet phone is, wouldn't it be great to have something that's just like an ordinary phone but takes advantage of, free or almost free calls? That's, from a consumer's point of view, that's what I'm buying. That's the benefit, none of the technology. And you have to have, as the brand leader, the confidence to own the category, if you like, So that was an example. Just to show you that it can work in completely different categories. So it's not just, electronic goods and certainly not just FMCG. We've been doing more and more work with the pharmaceutical industry because there are fewer blockbuster drugs coming through, and they now have to really connect and understand patients and physicians in order to do marketing. I mean, in order to market what's there. And Cialis, for me, is just a really nice example because from a scientific point of view, it is a weaker, less potent, less good drug than Viagra. This is the Viagra category. I have to be careful how I phrase everything I'm about to say. But you know, Viagra was the brand leader. It literally had 100% market share. And Cialis, if I kind of perhaps jump to the end, has managed to acquire 40% market share in pretty much every market where it's launched. And it's done so from a clinician's point of view with a less good product, you know, from the clinical data, because what happens is it doesn't have as strong an action, but it lasts, I think, 3 or 4 times as long. And so the insight is something like Viagra may produce the strongest erectile action, but having just 4 hours in which to act significantly reduces the spontaneity and easy intimacy of a normal, happy, sex life. I'd happily accept some reduced strength of action for a much longer lasting product and a more normal sex life. Now, I don't know about you, but 4 hours is generally longer than most men I know, require. But I get the point, that you just don't have to, worry so much about things. Anyway, so just to show you that, I think this whole insights business works across any category. So let's do some other ones, some other well-known ones, just to sort of pull out what do we mean. So Persil, and I think sometimes it's Omo in some countries, but their dirt is good. That was that's an interesting insight, in a category that's talked about whiter than white and freshness and everything else for decades, to actually come up with the idea that rolling around in mud is part of growing up. It's actually part of looking after your children, not just having, whiter than white clean clothes, but it's being able to allow them to be children, without worrying, has helped that brand enormously. Another one which I like is for Kellogg's Special K, where this is the challenge of doing something just for you. And often this is mums, who the rest of the Kellogg kind of portfolio is all about children and all about others, but Special K is kind of just for you. And the third one to share, people in the UK may know this, but I guess in any of the countries listening in, there may well be a version of this. This is a sort of a public safety wearing seatbelts campaign. And it was by not wearing your seatbelt in the back, in the back of the car, you could kill someone you love. And there's a rather dramatic ad campaign that a very successful one that was made on the back of this. Okay. So has it worked? Now, I'm going to show you a couple of pieces of data, but I think it's fair to say that the insight, of course, how well it gets executed makes an enormous difference to whether something's going to work. But within Philips, this bar chart just shows you the improvement that they've managed to make in the number of insights validated just by having the feedback loop of the results. And it's like anything. If you actually get some feedback on, oh, okay, I didn't really realize that that was good or bad, then people can actually understand the basics and they can get much, much better at it. So Philips have, increased their insights validation, but they've also increased the scores that they've been getting for their concept testing. So that's another indicator. And this second chart is, I think, testing 312 concepts that Philips have tested, I think, in the last year or so. And just showing you the correlation from left to right of the worst performing and the best performing. And the green bar represents those concepts that were tested with a validated insight. And as you can see, it's not perfect by any means, but there is a strong correlation with the top 10% of concepts being driven by a validated insight. And I think, it's not saying that that's, the only thing that matters, but it does seem to make a very positive, difference. Okay. So the next little section, we've done a meta-analysis of the 3,500 insights that we've tested, and we've taken the top 10% and the bottom 10% to pull out some rules of thumb, if you like. And I'm going to share with you really just three, the three ones that I think are the main ones. And three is always much better. You can remember three. You can, I think people say you can remember 5 plus or minus 2. So hopefully this is at the memorable end. Number one, negative to positive structure works best. So just like I said with Dove, the beauty industry has made women feel bad about themselves. Wouldn't it be great if there was a brand that celebrated women as they are? Or it could be something, this was for Philips Medical, waiting to see a doctor at a hospital's a nervous time, and a medical advisory posters on the waiting room wall, make me feel more anxious about my condition. Wouldn't it be great if you like, I wish hospital waiting rooms provided a more calming environment and the advisory information was provided after you see the doctor, rather than scaring the bejesus out of me before I get in there. So the negative to positive, like all rules, you can break these, but generally speaking, this seems to work best. Secondly, short, sharp sentences are better. A bit like the famous Churchillian quote, apologies, I didn't have time to write a short letter. It's difficult to make something really succinct and short, but frankly, brevity and being able to capture your insight in as clear and fewer words as possible does help make it work, if you like. It's clear what it's saying. And the third one, which I think is perhaps the most controversial, at least from all the conversations we've had with clients and people who are interested in this, but make it category specific. I think when it comes to insights, there's a temptation to make it almost philosophical, very general human truths. Now, I'm not saying that can't work, but it does seem that the best insights manage to root that, a big thought like that in the category. And it's more difficult. I think it's fair to say it's more difficult to do that because you're talking about chocolate or beer or something, and to root a truth, something that feels poignant, in the category can be difficult. But it definitely seems to work much better if you can make it category specific. Excuse me. I think a cough is my permission to take a swig of tea. So I hope everyone will forgive me for just a little 2-second break. Oh, that's good. Okay, so if we take the Dove Real Beauty and we just break it down, there are a few other little rules here where it seems to work. And so on the right-hand side, don't make it a hard sell. Don't try and actually deliver the benefit. Don't use unduly emotive language, is what we found. Because there's a temptation almost to try and overwrite it in order to make it feel significant. Obviously don't talk down to people, don't patronize them, and try and make it sound as though it's been written by a human being. It's sort of common sense, I think, all these things, but that will help it. It has to be natural but significant, and that's a difficult thing to do. Okay, so talking of which, if that's how you validate it, and it's easy enough, I think, to define what makes a great insight, what about generating them? Well, the truth is, it's really hard. Let's be honest. It's easy to say, what a good one is, and really, really hard to get one. This is not the sort of thing that comes out with every research project by any means, but I do think, my general rule of thumb, I think, the sort of the brain juicer philosophy, if you like, is that it is a creative task to really generate a great insight. And if you can find fresh ways to look, listen, and learn, you're going to stand a much greater chance of getting a fresh insight. So I don't want to have a go at focus groups because, they can be very valuable, but I just think doing yet another focus group is pretty unlikely to reveal some dramatic insight. And so trying to do something that's a little bit unusual in your articulation and generation is I just think better. Now, again, I'm not saying that these are the only ways, because frankly, my suggested approach to generating a great insight would probably be summarized as by any means possible. It's a creative process. Find a creative way to explore. But to give you some, I don't know, inspiration, to give you some ideas, these are some of the ways that we've explored generating insights. So I won't do all of them, but FamCam, Family Cam at the top. This is where we've wired up a consumer's home like Big Brother. And we did a project with Unilever Oral Care where we wired up a bathroom, slightly controversial. We had to make sure the camera didn't move and was positioned just on the mirror so that we didn't get into trouble. And the family had 4 children, and we just left the camera running for, I think, about 7 weeks. And what the ethnographer that we were working with did was, using the technology, just sort of fast-forwarded through the 7 weeks to see how many times the children brushed their teeth, and discovered, appalled, but discovered that they brushed their teeth just less than once a day on average. Yeah, and so any of the parents listening will probably recognize this. Have you brushed your teeth, dears? Of course, they always say yes. And the thing is, they lie. So we developed a concept called truth paste to stop the little angels lying through their teeth. And basically, that's the sort of thing. I mean, ethnography, I think, can be very powerful. So behavioral, kind of approaches, I would recommend. The other one that we did with mobile, because I do think mobile research has great potential, but please, 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 can it not be another way to torture respondents? Can we actually use it to do something which we can't do with normal research, like moments of truth? I mean, so more like a real-time diary where people can text you in the moment of something. And we did an interesting project on the nature of risk amongst teenagers. So we had 200 teenagers, and they had to text us every time they were confronted with a risk. And they basically had a menu of what type of risk it was: sex, drugs, rock and roll, a personal appearance, whatever. And they had to say how risky it felt, whether they took the risk, and how rewarded they felt having taken it or not taken it. And we got a couple of interesting insights, but the one that amused me was when it came to sexual risk. Friday and Saturday night, we got quite an uplift in, in texts, but not as much as Monday night. And it was like, what's going on Monday night? So we phoned a few of them back, and it sort of became obvious pretty quickly that what they said was, yeah, well, parents are working on Monday night, and it's a school night. No one thinks anything's happening on Monday night, and it's close enough to the weekend where you flirt at the weekend and then you seal the deal Monday night. And again, I'm not sure that would have come out even in in-depth interviews. Maybe it would, but it was a nice way to do it. Okay, so I'm going to now take you through Juicy Brains Community and DigiVisuals in just a little bit more detail, and then we'll finish and do some questions. So. Just a few minutes, I think. Juicy Brains Community is an online community, and many of you may actually already be using online communities. There's not a great deal to say on it, other than I think what we've observed is it's a great way to do iterative, sequential recycling, if you like, iterative qual. So instead of just relying on a kind of a 2-hour focus group, you can actually work with a group of consumers for several weeks. And you can give them different tasks, you can see what's coming out, you can kind of redirect it, you can kind of get them to do something creative. And it's very flexible and often produces some really interesting stuff. The one I want to finish on is what we call DigiVigils. Now this is slightly weird even by BrainJuicer standards, so bear with me. I'll see if I can do justice. But these are research robots. Okay, they're programmed on on the internet to basically build up a very three-dimensional, real, enriched picture of any marketing construct. So it could be a trend, turning a trend into a person and then making that person represent that trend in everything they do. Or it could be a segmentation where you're trying to really make, turn something slightly two-dimensional and flat into something rich. It could be a brand persona or even a net promoter. And I'll give you a couple of examples, as we go. Now, probably the best way to explain it is to give you a real example. So this is Nicole, and Nicole was designed to represent a trend, small, precious, and captivating. And what we did is we programmed her with the kind of key characteristics of the trend, but also the sort of the emotions that we would associate with it and with her. And then it races out on the internet and it's searching through videos, pictures, blogs for content that Nicole could have actually produced herself. One way to think about it is if we were creating a DigiVigil for you, for each of you listening, you'd have to kind of identify yourself. What are the key characteristics, the key personality traits? What job do you do? Where do you live? You make it as real as you can possibly make it. And then you basically watch and you get all the content, thousands of bits of content, which you could have actually kind of created. And in the case of Nicole, I think we made her live in West London. She was a jewelry designer. We gave her an eBay account so we could actually watch the sort of things that she would be interested in bidding on. And you can do that, as needed with each DigiVigil. And this is her life board. So, very quickly, because, it's really just to illustrate the sort of fresh approaches to trying to inspire yourself to find insights. But Nicole there was a lot of cutesy domestic things that came up, lots of puppies and dogs, kind of quite schmaltzy, really. But then it was mixed with a kind of an edgy gothic edge. There was quite a dark edge as well. So it wasn't just very, sort of 12-year-old girl. There was definitely a bit of an edge, and there were these slightly weird dolls that kept appearing, and sort of there was a quirkiness. But she's a city girl. She likes the kind of the urban village, if you like, that kind of sense of camaraderie and friendship. It is the sort of Friends, I guess, approach. And I can't show it on GoToMeeting, but there's a great video which we basically produce a video of her life. And everything in the video has come from this automated trawl. So it's all kind of content is automatically generated. And then there is a very creative research process of sifting all the data and learning about her life and pulling out what's important. So it is a man and machine mixture, I guess. And that's why I did this picture of a composite of Nicole made up of lots of people, because that is in effect what it is. It's sort of mass ethnography. So to show you finally how we use it, what we've learned is you create an idea, a product idea in the category you're working in that that Nicole would love. So in this case, we invented cuties, and these are large wrapped flat sweets, a bit like a kind of people use T-shirts to message, to say something. And, maybe she's, I don't know, missed a meeting or, couldn't make something and she wanted to say sorry. There would be a picture of a dog looking very kind of sheepish and apologetic, and it would just say, sorry, I'm a bad hound, and she might give the sweets. But once you know her, then you can say, so what is it about that product that we know she would like that would make a great insight? And there are times in my life when I just need to say sorry or cheer up a friend, be coquettish or just plain silly. Wouldn't it be great to express my sentiments creatively in candy? Okay, So that's basically how we use it, and we've tried it on segmentation and brand personas and insight generation, and it does seem to work well. And I'm not saying it's the only way by any means at all, but it's hopefully just to illustrate that if you try something fresh and original, it's a much better way generally to try and find a fresh insight. And there endeth the chat. So I think I forgot to say at the beginning, please type any questions or thoughts as you're going. But while I'm wittering right at the end, please do. And I've got Will, our juicy evangelist, here with me, who's been very patiently listening.
Great. Okay, John. First question for you. Do the digivisuals tend to produce insights that are more resonant or that have more edge?
Well, I think like most research techniques, the resonance is the easier bit to find. So I would say the literal answer is it helps you produce, things that are resonant. And the edge but because it's a fresh approach and because it has a bit of originality, it does suggest what the edge might be. It does help you. When you create these weird products for Nicole, I think that's what helps you get something edgier and not just resonant. Yeah, so the edge often, that's part of, I think, of the creative process. Yeah.
Okay, well, appropriately enough, John, Damien has asked, could you quickly recap on the edge bit? He missed it at the start.
Yeah, well, our definition of a great insight, what we learned, I think, over the 6 years we've been working, with insights, is actually a better working definition is, wow, you really understand me, which is the resonance part, almost better than I understand myself, which is the edge. This is the response that a great insight should evoke, or something like the response in a consumer. And the edge, when someone says something that surprises you, or you instantly acknowledge its truth, but you go, yeah, I've never heard it said quite like that before. That's the edge, and it's the edge that really drives great communication. I didn't mention it, but I think it may be worth sharing. What we've noticed over the course of testing all these insights is that you need a really almost a top quintile performing insight on edge and resonance to have a great communication insight, an insight that can drive a great communication campaign. And you don't need the insight to be as strong to develop great products. So you do need a validated insight, something that's resonant and has some edge, but it doesn't have to be as extreme to do good NPD.
Marvelous. Okay. One more for you. Do you actually test the insight or a concept that represents the insight?
Just the insight. We experimented with lots of different ways of doing it at the beginning, with mood boards and visuals, but nope, we decided in the end to keep it really, really stripped down. So it is just the statement, those statements that I was sharing through the presentation. Words only, so that everything's equal. And it's quite a hard test. It's a tough test. But we find that it's the better for it. So you don't delude yourself that you've got something when you haven't.
Okay, and just on that point, you mentioned insights should be written as if they've been written by a human, but what are your thoughts on writing them in a more metaphorical manner?
Well, metaphor is powerful. Very, very powerful. The human brain seems to have been evolved to work in metaphors and visuals, much more than it does in mathematics, data, and precision. So yeah, I think metaphor, has a place, and I think if it's done well, it can work. But I still feel it needs to be rooted in the category. So it needs to be a category-relevant metaphor, one that actually helps communicate, the thought. But yeah, and I think it's a nice thought.
Great. Okay. Well, got a couple of questions on digivisuals. In what stage of product development or planning is it appropriate and most valuable to use the digivisuals?
Don't know is the honest answer. We've been working with them, I mean, since March, and we're learning. What I can tell you is we've used them for segmentation, which was, to basically enrich the segments pretty much ready for communication development. We've used them at the very start of the process to generate insights for new electronic devices. We've used them for net promoters. So Philips use net promoters a lot, and so we created a digivisual to represent the net promoter in baby care products and I think electronic toothbrushes. And again, that was actually to help them with the next round of concept development. But so at the moment we're experimenting with where it can work, and it does seem to work across a number of things.
Cool. Okay. In fact, one more on testing insights here from Marek. If you're only testing insights, how can you be sure that the execution of that insight is as powerful? Do you then proceed with a full concept test?
Yeah, I mean, they do. I mean, all the clients we work with on this, I mean, I think Beiersdorf, Unilever, Nestle, as well as Philips and some of the pharma companies, it is a pre-stage to then building a concept. So they use the insight in the concept. And no, I mean, where we have a close relationship, we can help advise, whether the execution has, kind of lived up to it. But in most cases, as you won't be surprised, we're in the lap of the brand team for how well they've managed to execute against the insight. Hopefully, a really great insight almost suggests the concept, and therefore that's probably the best way to ensure that it's a good one.
Cool. Claire is asking, is the emphasis in assessing an insight on testing it quantitatively or qualitatively?
Well, we do. I mean, this is a sort of brain juicer thing. I mean, the first focus for Philips was on finding a quantitative measure that actually seemed to measure, what we regarded as an insight. But on all of our projects, we have a couple of tools. One is the Mind Reader, which basically gives you very rich diagnostics on what it was, what did that insight evoke for you? What did it make you feel? What did it make you think? What did you like about it? What did you dislike about it? And it breaks up the insight into its constituent parts even to sort of get a sense of how it works. So yeah, we luckily have the means of delivering a very kind of qualitatively, diagnostically rich debrief to complement the numbers so we can explain why. And most projects end up with hopefully one or two insights that are clearly validated, great, good to go. A couple or several that may just be a disaster, forget them, and then some in the middle where the diagnostics helps you work out whether you can improve it to a point of validation or maybe it's just average.
Okay, and another question here from Damien. Thank you, Damien. Is it important to always embed the brand idea or the solution into the insight?
The opposite, actually. So what we try and advise is to avoid specific solutions or even specific brands. It's almost as if insights are best thought of and created at the category level. Now, obviously, what you're going to do is you're going to attach your brand to it, like Dove did. But I think better to avoid the brand and avoid the specific solution, because when we've tested insights that did have solutions, inevitably it's not quite right, and therefore it doesn't give you a clean and a clear read on whether you've got the right thought.
Okay, here's an interesting one. Is a good insight leading to one benefit only, or can it be so true that more benefits can actually be linked to it? Or to put it another way, can different concepts have the same insight?
Different concepts can have the same insight, for sure. I'm less convinced that there are different suggested directions and benefits within an insight. I think it is a singular, potent thought which can have a number of expressions. So if you took, the dirt is good, kind of insight, you can imagine that there are quite a number of different products, cleaning products that that could come out of that. And I think that would be probably my way of thinking about it.
Okay, another question on DigiVisuals here. Are there any data protection issues with that approach? Are we harvesting individuals effectively?
Yeah, no, I'm glad that came up, because I think we're all in a brave new world of trying to work out what are the ethics of doing it. It's one thing to be able to do something, and then should you be able to do something, and what are the ethics of it? So let me try and step through why we feel that this is the right side of things. The way that DigiVisuals works is we're not trying to understand the lives of the people from whom we find content. Yeah, so there are lots of web approaches which want to try and almost Big Brother, kind of spy on people's browsing habits and what they do. That's not how DigiVisuals work. What we're interested in is the content, because the content fits our marketing construct. I mean, we're inventing a fake person, and it's that person that we're interested in, not the actual lives of the people from whom the content comes. And therefore, it's actually anonymous. It's close to anonymous, which is actually the way research has always been done. We're also not trying to pretend that they're anything other than robots. So we're creating a little symbols to make it very transparent, because it doesn't rely on people following them, and we don't need to hide it. And Twitter are aware of what we're doing, and they approve. They think it's fascinating. But yes, I do think there are some ethical issues with these things, and we're going to have to work them out. But my rule of thumb with anything to do with the internet or social media is complete transparency is the only way. Otherwise, you will get undone. So that's what we're trying to do in everything we're doing.
Okay, here's a interesting category-specific question. In your view, is it possible to create Edge for global insights regarding food, taking into account that great insights should be category-specific?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two levels in the question, I suspect. One is, can you create universal insights that work globally? Answer, yes, but it's by no means easy, because the culture obviously has an impact, and we test a lot of insights globally, and they work sometimes in China and not in America. When it comes to food, you've got a double problem, because food itself is so cultural. It's probably one of the most, if not the most, cultural category. Trying to find a universal insight is more difficult than other categories, but still possible. So we've done it with Kraft, we've done it with Nestle and Unilever. So yes, it is possible, but I wouldn't pretend it's anything other than hard.
Okay, well, John, I'm just going to ask you one more question. This approach seems to go wide and then narrow down with the validation. Have you encountered much nervousness from clients taking this different approach?
Well, certainly a lot of nervousness with DigiVisuals, which I think is perfectly understandable. In fact, I think I'd be surprised if people weren't slightly sort of nervous. I mean, we did a big project with a client who was willing to experiment. Yeah, it's new, but what we've been doing is validating all the insights that come out to actually prove that it's not just something that's kind of, oh, that's interesting. It actually has value to the business. And I think having the validation piece on the back, being able to quantitatively validate, is of huge value for clients. And I think, something that they really appreciate. In fact, I mean, perhaps just to finish with an anecdote, we have had I think 3 clients, they will remain unnamed, who brought us, I think, about 50 insights. They were all the insights that they were working with, and they had a kind of a hidden agenda, or not so hidden, which was they felt that the insights weren't very good. And they would rather like to prove to the organization, I mean, not to make a point, but to educate, to try and improve what they're doing, to kind of point out that they weren't very good, and to explain why, and to sort of help the organization learn what a much better insight should be and what it looks like. And that's, hopefully that's useful, and nice to be able to make a contribution. Yeah. Well, look, thanks for listening, everyone. I hope we haven't pushed your patience too far, and hope you've taken away 1 or 2, useful thoughts, and hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.